Okay, well, here we are, and we are entering into the sixth week. And probably the biggest thing that you need to start to consider or think about in this class is our first kind of big project, and that's you're going to develop your own preschool. Okay, so hopefully you've watched the Gopnik videos. There was one last week, there's a couple this week. She's a foremost expert on kind of what it should look like, what motivates kids to learn. Also, next week there'll be an article on preschools. There's a lot of research being done on what really is an effective preschool. We're seeing this move in America to kind of have a direct instruction approach, kind of what you would have if you went into a classroom here on campus, or if you were in your high school classes. In other words, you sit down and the teacher or the professor's at the front of the room and they kind of give you all the information you need. There's not a lot of active participation, active involvement on the student's part. It's very passive. So we're starting to see this kind of filter down into the preschools because there seems to be such an emphasis on testing and passing certain tests and so forth. And so your job is going to be to create a child-centered preschool, one where the children are actually dictating a lot of how the learning takes place in that particular environment. They're actively involved in their own learning situation. So there's a tutorial that will show you where to find the project. There's a great example of a project that was turned in a couple of years ago, and it's a phenomenal project, and the transitions are great, the explanations are great. So when you're doing this project, you want to keep all of that in mind. Now, most of you will probably do a PowerPoint presentation, but some of you might decide to do a YouTube, which is fine. So however you decide to present it, that's up to you. But also make sure you pay attention to the rubric. It is a heavy point total as far as your grade goes, so it's going to be graded with that rubric in mind. So look at, there's a lot with, like I say, with preschools that are going on. Is it child-centered or is it adult-centered? We're seeing a lot of play disappearing from children's lives, just unstructured play, where kids get together with other kids in the neighborhood, and they're not only interacting with kids their own age, but they're interacting with older kids who are going to model behavior and teach the younger ones, here's how you fit into these types of activities. What's your role? And so we're seeing a lot of adult-directed things. So in other words, soccer practice is now down to 2 and 3 years old, and every other kind of activity that a child can be in, they kind of are very organized or adult-directed from a very early age, and they're all with their own age group. So we want to see more mingling. And so there's play. You'll find that as we go through this, and you go through, hopefully you watch the little lecture on early childhood development that relates to education. That play is really at the center of it all. But it can't just be free play all the time. It can also be directed or guided play, which is a Vygotskian type of concept where scaffolding takes place. In other words, I might show you how to do it. We do it together, and then you do it on your own. But also in scaffolding, it would be like, let's play with the blocks, but now the teacher is down on the ground saying, well, where does this go? And how many more pieces can we put in there? How many cars are going to go over that bridge? And if you're going to bake cookies out of sand and sell them to your classmates, how much are they going to cost? If we're going to lay some stones down for a pathway out into the garden that the school is working on, would circles be better, or would triangles be better, or would it be better to kind of mix them? What do you think? So in other words, in a very effective preschool, the teachers are actually involved in the learning with the children. They're down on their level, and they're talking to them, and they're interacting with them. They're not standing off to the side and just kind of observing the children play, because when children play, they'll get bored with what they're doing. They'll just get used to it. So you have to have all kinds of stimulating things to get them engaged. And then the teacher needs to engage with them, which is a huge problem, is that preschool teachers oftentimes aren't trained. They're overpaid. Or they're underpaid. I'm sorry, they're not overpaid. They're underpaid. The turnover is very high. They're just not trained and skilled at interacting with young children in a way that's going to develop the abilities of those children. So preschool should be a focus, especially we see that a lot of the preschools that are good are in areas where parents can pay a lot of money for their children to go to preschool. But we need them in all areas, and we need them accessible to all young kids and at a high quality. Okay, so if we go back to the teacher, do the kids say, I just love my teacher? All right. And so there's got to be that emotional connection, that nurturing with the interaction between the teacher and the children, constantly stimulating them, letting the children actually decide some of the things that they're going to do and how they're going to do it and when they're going to do it. So executive function that we learned about in one of the short videos is, basically, are we teaching or developing the executive function of these young children that will play out very well later in their lives? I mean, do they have mental flexibility? Can they switch from one thing to another? Do they have inhibitory control? Can they say, well, it's your turn and now it's not my turn? Even though I want to go, I need to wait my turn. And do I have working memory where I remember what to do? And do I have emotional regulation so that I can have the appropriate emotional response at a given time? So we'll be talking about this for the next couple of weeks. It's due in week 8, so you have 3 weeks to do it. So if you have any questions, then certainly ask me, but make sure you watch all the tutorials and all the videos. There's also this week a little link to go to some films by Brazelton, who did the neonatal behavioral assessment scale, that basically, there's the APGAR scale and then there's the Brazelton. And the Brazelton basically says, how does a baby like to be handled? How does the baby calm itself? What's the social interactions with the child and those around them when they're approached, when there's withdrawal, and so forth. But anyways, they're great films on potty training. And so hopefully you watch them. They're very informative, and they're good. And I just hope you watch them. There's no quiz associated with them. Brazelton said it's basically a window into what it will take to nurture a child, so with his scale. So there's also a film on the still face experiment, which is a very famous experiment by Tronick, and it's basically the connection that needs to be made between that developing young child and those that are interacting with it. So you saw a film called Serve and Return. What happens when the parent doesn't respond to the infant? They just have a still face. It's a cool experiment and with long-ranging effects. So, and then there's Harry Harlow on Contact Comfort. Harry Harlow, one of my favorites, with the little monkeys, and the importance of the comfort that children need, that closeness that they need. He did the experiments with monkeys, but basically it's talking about attachment theory. And then there's the marshmallow experiment that I hope you really enjoy this. But do you eat the marshmallow? I mean, can you exhibit delay gratification? I know with all my friends, I tell them about the marshmallow experiment, and I have them now saying, hey, I ate the marshmallow. I just went for it. And sometimes you do have to just go for it. And so there are some PowerPoints that are associated with Harlow, Tronick, and the marshmallow experiment. If you want to know more about those experiments, then just kind of check those slides out. They're great experiments, and they're so important in the developmental process. And then there's a couple of films in there with Cookie Monster. And that's just, you'll see the application of the marshmallow effect. So if you have children or you know people with children, they'd be great to show. But also, check yourself out. How are you at delaying gratification? Do you know when to delay gratification? And do you know when I need to go for this? So anyway, so a lot this week. If you have any questions about any of it, then let me know. But get started on the preschool project. Check it out. If you have any questions about how to put it together, let me know. But I think once you watch the example, click on that link for the example, it'll give you an incredible example of what these things are to look like. Now, you might have there are certain required stations that you have to have, but there's 4 that you can decide what you would like children to do. And so that's up to you, but everything has to be developed and make sure it's a warm, welcoming environment that kids really love being there. Okay, so I will talk to you again next week.